Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Gerrit and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Gerrit and I'm joined by my friend, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Gerrit. When last we left you, we were about to read a John C. Bennett affidavit, or one of his many affidavits, or
affidoy. Maybe it goes into a kind of a French plurality.
We are going to get back to that, but we wanted to start off with a couple of emails if we could.
We were just running a little long, and my hatred for John C. Bennett and all things Missouri kind of it sends me into a kind of a tailspin.
Yeah. So what started as Apostles and Apostates Part 2 turned into
Why I Hate John C. Bennett Part 11.
That's right. So this first email comes to us from Anthony. To the good Dr. Dirkmott and the ever-entertaining Professor Leduc, much like your podcast, my explanation is lengthy, with only asking one simple question. By the way, Anthony, we're not going to get to your question.
Yeah, in fact, we'll never answer your question. I don't even know what it is yet, but I know we won't answer it.
I do know what it is, and I know we won't get to it.
See, that's why Richard and I are friends.
I stumbled over your podcast a few months ago, and I've listened to all the free episodes, hoping to find something worth paying for the premium content.
Wow.
Still looking.
Whoa.
Thank you for sharing your talents and insights, for listening.
The apparently no talents.
I've gathered, just nothing worth giving money for. I've gathered that we are from the same generation, and we have a lot of same gospel experiences. I served my mission in Southern California, 99 to 2001.
Just like you.
Very nice. I was 98 to 2000.
Was he in Riverside?
He was not. He was in the San Diego mission.
Ooh, so heaven.
So people would live in my mission because it was cheaper, and they would visit his mission for recreation, work, whatever. So I was about an hour from Temecula, Murrieta, where I served. San Diego's beautiful. While there, I had the humbling privilege and honor of teaching and watching an investigator from Wisconsin be baptized.
Okay.
He was golden.
No, I'm throwing the flag. Okay, 15 yards. This person's name Anthony? Is that?
Yeah, Anthony.
Anthony, why do you lie? Why do you try to send to this podcast the lies that you just much lies?
But here's where there might be some truth. He said we even had to reschedule a discussion for his baptism because the Packers were in town playing the Chargers. So that probably rings true.
Wow.
How many times did you would go tracting?
It was literally
on Sundays.
you could do.
Right, on Sundays, Packer games. How were you received?
Not well. You know what's funny, actually? At first, when you knocked on the door, everybody simply assumed that it was either an emergency, like one of you had fallen off your bike and your leg was behind your head, or that you didn't know when the game was. Because people in Wisconsin are really, really, really nice until you try to talk to them about God. So if you want to ask them, hey, what's the best way to fit your groceries into a bag? Except you'd say big. They're super nice about that. Like, hey, what do you think the best way to fit my groceries into this bag is? Oh, I'll show you. Fine. If you try to talk to them about Jesus, that's completely different. Then they turn on you. They also turn on you when it comes to the Packers. So most commonly, when we tried very hard to not be knocking on doors during a Packer game, but also we're not allowed to read the paper and we didn't have cell phones. So how in the world do we know when a Packer game is, right? Like we know, well, it's Sunday. If it's an early game, this is going to be bad, So we would, people were like, well, why didn't you just go to members' houses for dinner during that time? Yeah. I like how you said both members' houses and the word dinner, as though those things were going on. You could have, why didn't you do some street contacting? Oh, yes. Yeah. Lots of people walking around the street of Green Bay. You know, it's January, just all kinds of people out. There's literally nothing you can do to share the gospel in Wisconsin. I'm not even going to say tracking. There's just nothing you can do. But we would have people, you'd knock on the door, and if the Packers were playing, they actually were very solicitous towards you. They were like, oh, hey guys, you know it's a late game today, right? Like it was. I know you probably thought it was a Monday night. No, it's tonight. You know, they would assume the only reason we'd be knocking on anyone's door during a game is that we didn't know when the game started. That's the only rational reason why. And then when they found out that we were there intentionally, then they, told us that my parents were never married and then slammed the door.
All right, going on to Anthony's email.
So that maybe then.
Maybe. The Packer thing brought you back that it might be true.
It brought me back that maybe that's evidence. That's an affidavit.
I, too, had found and enjoyed Truman G. Madsen's CD collection of lectures on the prophet Joseph Smith and loved how he put into context the stories and history of the early church, much like you two, only better.
Wow, Anthony hates us.
By the way, but
Sure,
that's true.
Yeah,
I mean,
better.
get out of here. If you haven't, stop listening right now and go get those. They're all available on YouTube.
Well, that's our marketing campaign. Is stop listening to this right now.
And go listen to anything Truman G. Madsen's ever done.
Pretty sure Rex's Elders Quorum president's already stopped.
Along with this, President Hinckley, President Faust, Elder Maxwell, a good story of Jay Golden, and the pure heart of Porter Rockwell show us the Lord uses men from all walks of life to build Zion. No matter their background or weakness, they continue to testify of the continuing restoration. Okay, down to my reason for the unnecessary long email. And then he goes on to ask a question. We're not going to get to it. It's a question about the succession crisis. So we just wanted to read the positive part of the email, as positive, I guess, as that email was.
Yeah, the email saying, hey, I don't think you guys have good enough stuff for anyone to pay for. And by the way, you do it worse than most other people.
That's right. Well, do it worse than one of the best that ever did it. So
he is better than us.
But we are going to do a series of episodes on the succession crisis.
We'll never do that,
but not this week. So we will be getting to that eventually. We have one other email here to read. I am in Missouri as a subject line. In August, I'll be holding my grandma hostage on a 3-day drive from Ohio to Utah. I don't know if it's possible, but if there could be a few episodes about the violence in Missouri, I want her to be able to hear it and really let it sink in while we drive the path that the pioneers took.
Well, she got a little bit of that from our last episode.
Yes, so a little bit from that. A little background. My mom joined the church when she was 19. My dad was her friend from work, baptized her, left on a mission, and 2 years later, they were married. My grandma took the discussions 25 plus years ago, and while my brother and I were both on our missions, we challenged her to read the Book of Mormon and pray about it. She made it 3 chapters both times. Now, Gerrit and I talked about this. Is it possible, Leah, that you had her start in 2 Nephi 12?
Right.
Like that's like you just had her start in a
dead center of the Isaiah chapters.
Well, at the very beginning, really.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and the reason I say that is because when I read the Book of Mormon, I start in 4th Nephi. When I start reading, start in 4th Nephi, because I start with essentially them killing and eating people, and then I end the Book of Mormon with Jesus coming. And so I want to end it just changes my my perspective a little bit in reading the Book of Mormon to have it, instead of ending tragically and terrible, it ends on a high note.
But you're suggesting that Leah is having her grandma start
on 2 Nephi chapter 12.
Nephi, just like, hey, no, look, we've got Bible stuff in here. No, there's Bible stuff. There's Bible stuff.
Yeah. And then she makes it 3 chapters, and then
she's like, because the daughters of Zion are haughty.
Anyways, it's possible that might not be your grandma's fault, because if you have her starting there, we don't blame her. I want her to hear the history about Missouri and the martyrdom. I am a premium content junkie. Oh, geez, I should have treated this with more respect.
Why didn't we read Leah's first and Anthony of I'm not willing to pay for anything
Never.
you guys put out ever?
A premium content junkie. Look forward to all you and Sultan Leduc. Well, I guess you and Dirk Moss, because you're the one reading the emails, have planned. Thank you, Leah. Well, so we are going to talk a little bit more about some of the things that go on in Missouri as we get back to the apostles and apostates, but not yet, because we're about to talk about Boggs for a second episode.
Well, speaking of succession, I mean, if we follow the apostles and apostates far enough, we'll get up to where some of them are apostatizing because of the succession.
Well, I mean, we've received probably 20 plus emails about succession, so we really do need to get there eventually.
Yeah, we don't like to give people what they want. We like to give them what they need. And what they need is us not answering their question.
That's right.
What they need is an entirely unnecessary, too long of an introduction.
Yeah, yep.
Well, you just got that. We just gave that to you. But yes, we are going to talk about first the affidavit that John C. Bennett swears out. This is, again, after he's been excommunicated for numerous adulteries, after he has admitted to these publicly, after he's actually sworn to his crimes.
Do we know how many adulterous affairs?
We don't know exactly how many. Now,
is it like LeBron James in Miami? Not one, not two, not three. The number of championships.
I mean, maybe it might be, if we're going to use an NBA player, it might be closer to Wilt Chamberlain. If we're using a kind of
Oh, I was just doing their press conference. How many championships are going to win? Not one.
The very
not
interesting
two,
thing
not
about John C. Bennett is he spends the next several years claiming that he was excommunicated on totally trumped up false charges, right? That he was excommunicated because he caught them doing that, and that's why they excommunicated him, to keep him, hush him up, basically. So he actually denies for years that he committed adultery at all. And yet I know that he's lying. And I know that he's lying because John C. Bennett will later say, okay, yeah, I did have an affair, but they were guilty of worse things. So after years of saying, there were no affairs at all, he then, in a public meeting in Massachusetts, actually, I believe, says, okay, I was involved with a fair princess of Nauvoo.
So here's the problem, though, is that your evidence that he's lying is him saying that he's lying, which may very well be evidence that he wasn't lying.
So it's possible that he lies so much that even when he lies about himself lying, that he's somehow telling the truth about the fact that he never lied because he was lying about the truth?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
I think that we need to get into this and examine it further. But first, the affidavit. And this is the Justice of the Peace writing this down. Personally appeared before me, Samuel Marshall, a Justice of the Peace in and for said county, John C. Bennett, who being duly sworn according to the law deposeth, saith that on the 5th of July, 1842, at the house of Mr. Hamilton in Carthage, Mr. Orr and Porter Rockwell came to him with a desire to private interview, to which the deponent replied that if he, Rockwell, had anything to say, he could speak it out in front of the gentlemen present. Rockwell said that it was a private matter, which interested them only. The deponent went out with him. I like, again, Bennett, even in his own affidavit, I was too honorable to say that we could speak privately about something like that. And then he said, yeah, but it is private. Okay, so I went out with him. Yeah, great principles. Rockwell said, Doctor, you do not know your friends. I'm not your enemy, and I do not wish that you make use of my name in your publications.
You said that like a stereotypical Italian guy on a pizza box.
Yeah.
You make a mai.
Yeah, make a mai. Yeah. And you can come get our fresh breadsticks as well. Sometimes I have a hard time with words and forming them together to make sentences.
Well, you see me poorly read emails every week. I feel your pain on that.
Yeah. Deponent replied that he recognized Joe Smith and all his friends as his personal enemies, to which Rockwell replied, I have been informed by Warner and Davis that you and Smith gave me $50 in a wagon for shooting Boggs, and that I can and will whip any man that will tell such a cursed lie. Did you say so or not? After looking at him for a moment or two, the deponent said, I never said so, sir, but I did say, and I now say to your face, that you left Nauvoo about 2 months before the attempted assassination of Governor Boggs of Missouri and returned the day before the report of his assassination reached there, and that 2 persons in Nauvoo told me that you told them. Now, listen to this affidavit. 2 persons in Nauvoo told me that you told them that you had been to the upper part of the Missouri. At this point, it'd be easier just to say destructives.
That's why he skips to it before.
Yeah.
When he's not, under oath.
Yeah, when he's under oath. To which Rockwell replied, well, I was there, and if I shot Boggs, they have got to prove it. I never did an act in my life that I was ashamed of, and I do not fear to go anywhere that I have ever been, for I have done nothing criminal. Deponent replied, certainly they have got to prove it on you if you did shoot him. I know nothing of what you did. I was not there. I only know the circumstances, and from them I draw up my own inferences, and the public will theirs. And now, sir, if either you or Joe Smith think that you can intimidate me by your threats, you are mistaken in your man. And I wish you to understand distinctly that I am opposed to Joe and his holy host. I shall tell the truth fearlessly, except for the 1.5 years that you stayed in the church after you knew he was going to try to assassinate him. But other than that, I will tell the truth fearlessly, and regardless of consequences. Rockwell replied, if you say that Joe Smith gave me $50, so I already know that, I already know he's not quoting. Porter Rockwell never referred to Joseph Smith as Joe, ever. But here apparently he is. If you say that Joe Smith gave me $50 and a wagon to shoot Boggs, I can whip you and I will do it in any crowd.
I thought he offered him $500.
I know, it's funny. I mean, maybe he just said,
you're shortchanging his buddy?
Yeah, well, he's just like, you know what? 10%. It's tithing on it. I'm going to tithe it.
By the way, what's worse than hearsay? Is there something worse than hearsay? Well, that's not admissible.
It's anytime Bennett talks.
Okay.
Whatever that is.
Okay.
This.
Here's hearsay, and then below that is John C. Bennett.
Well, that's the funny part about affidavits is that you realize whether an affidavit is sworn or not, it doesn't prove literally anything in the affidavit. That's why they are generally not admissible, because you have to be able to cross-examine the person. So that when they say things like, if you say that Joe Smith gave me $50, that the other attorney can stop and say, so you're saying that Porter Rockwell used a derogatory term for Joseph Smith when he was talking to you. That's what you're saying, because that's would demonstrate that you're kind of making this up, Anyway, why are you harping on what I have not said? This is what Bennett is saying. I have not told you what I have said to your face. I have told you what I have said to your face, and in the presence of this gentleman, and you acknowledge the truth of all that I've said, and I shall say it again. And if you wish to fight, I am ready for you. I would have loved to see that. I would have paid pay-per-view prices, Porter Rockwell versus John C. Bennett. I mean,
it's like an MTV claymation death match from the late 90s.
Dana White got nothing on that fight. You know what? My Celestial Kingdom, if I make it, what I want to see is Porter Rockwell fighting John C. Bennett. That to me is Celestial Kingdom. In fact, you know what? I'm going to try to go now. Just because
you're trying to go to the Celestial Kingdom?
Well, I wasn't going to go before. My plan before was that Angie's such a good person that maybe I could just get in.
She'll drag you there, but
yeah, kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah, I expect Jesus to say something or the other, like, well, not for his sake, I guess, but for hers. And then, yeah. No. Yeah, perfect. Oh, look, it's Rockwell and Bennett. Yeah, Sunday in the Celestial Kingdom.
Well, Celestial Kingdom.
Well, I mean, you have to go down and find.
Yeah.
Find.
So this is after the resurrection.
Oh, clearly. Well, I want them to have bodies, so it can be a good fight. Anyway.
Hold on. Now I actually want to watch a fight where they don't have bodies. Just two spirits duking it out.
Clash. Well, I feel like Rex's Elders Court president is pretty disappointed right now. I'm sorry, let me go back to something more serious. John C. Bennett's affidavit filled with lies. Rockwell told the deponent, which is Bennett, that he had been accused wrongfully of wishing to assassinate him or being ordered by Joe Smith to do it. But the deponent said, I believe that Joe ordered you to do it. I know that orders went from him to the Danites for that purpose. Rockwell said that Smith had never given him such orders, neither was it his intention, and further this deponent saith not. The justice of the peace that they swear that affidavit out to is a man by the name of Samuel Marshall. Samuel Marshall is actually going to have a long history of anti-Mormonism as well. So not only is, okay, so sure, he's a justice of the peace, he's not a friendly justice of the peace. In fact, this is a little extra bonus for you.
Oh, okay,
here. Yeah. We're going to take 2 episodes to answer this question. Samuel Marshall is the justice of the peace. He's in Carthage, who will actually assault Minor Deming, the sheriff of Hancock County. Yep. He assaults Minor Deming.
Oh, friend of the show, Minor Deming.
Friend of the show. He assaults Minor Deming and tries to strangle him. And in that attempt to strangle him, Minor Deming will pull his gun and shoot him and kill him. And this is that same Samuel Marshall. So 3 years later, he's going to die attempting to kill the
non-Latter-day Saint Minor Deming.
Yeah, sheriff. He's a Christian. He's not a Latter-day Saint at all. But he's trying to do justice, like, hey, you can't just burn down their houses, guys. I mean, come on. So Samuel Marshall, clearly an objective justice of the peace, someone who's willing to try to strangle someone to death, to the point where he gets shot by the sheriff who he's trying to kill. Anyway, there's several affidavits that are in there, all sworn out to Samuel Marshall, and all saying that, oh yeah, I was told. Here's the funny part. It was a secret. Nobody knew anything about it. There's a dozen people in Carthage who all just happened to overhear it. Yeah, it was a secret. Only the First Presidency knew, and also all of these guys at this bar in Carthage also all know.
I'm picturing kind of in my mind a scene from Steel Magnolias, right? You've got True V and Weezer Boudreaux with her dog tied up in the front.
I'm a little bit concerned that you know the last names of some of the characters.
It's one of my wife's favorite movies. I've seen it 1,000 times. But this is how you've got they've got your boy Bennett. He's in there to get his hair done, and they're just talking about an upcoming wedding.
So I says to Mabel.
So I says to Mabel. As I says to Weezer, I says. And then how about them daughters of Zion?
Yeah. Hey, have you guys tried to kill any? Hey, has Joe Smith paid any y'all to shoot a Missouri governor lately? Oh, I have. Oh, okay. So that's how you envision it?
That's exactly how I envision it.
Well,
with John C. Bennett's head in one of those
hair dryer. You know what? He did have nice hair.
That's
From
what I'm
the
talking
images
about.
that we saw. I mean, how else was he able to seduce so many women in Nauvoo? Personally appeared before me Samuel Marshall, Justice of the Peace in said county, John H. Lawton, who being duly sworn according to law deposes, saith that on the 5th day of July he came to where General John C. Bennett and Orrin Porter Rockwell were in conversation at the house of Mr. Hamilton in Carthage, and heard Rockwell say that he'd been up in Boggs' neighborhood and that if he shot Boggs, they had to prove it. So I'm getting the same thing. And I even heard their conversation. This hearsay on top of hearsay about a hearsay conversation. That is all part of this Boggs, imbroglio, right? So does Joseph Smith ever say, oh yes, Boggs is going to die a horrible death? Now, this actually matters because like anti-Mormon subreddits, they will say things like, oh yeah, this is one of the failed prophecies of Joseph Smith. He prophesied that Boggs would die a horrible, violent death.
Just what level of Protestant hell is anti-Mormon subreddit?
It's like the 9th ring of Dante's.
It's combining all of the bad of Protestant hell with all of the bad of Catholic hell into one subreddit.
And no purgatory.
That's right.
You're
you're going straight.
No one's praying their way out of this. It's Calvin's hell. Yeah, and then when you've been there for ages, that's basically what it's like to read an anti-Mormon subreddit. The level of animosity is just, people have had a bad day. If you're looking for the most unhappy people on earth, and no one from the war zone in Ukraine is available, you could go there and you can get something slightly worse. Jeez. Yeah, I mean the bitterness is unbelievable. But they'll say things like on that. They'll say, here's one of the failed prophecies of Joseph Smith, because he prophesied that Boggs would die a violent death, and he didn't. He prophesied that a shadow would be over his grave, and there isn't one. And he prophesied that no grass would ever grow on Boggs's grave. Yeah. Now you'll find you can't find those prophecies anywhere. I always find it best when you're attacking a religion for being false to make up things about what that religion said and then prove that it never happened. It seems to be pretty effective. Now, that folklore that you're referencing, certainly people have repeated it. I've actually had multiple people ask me about it. Most of them people who either serve their mission there or who are from there. Oh yeah, Joseph said that there'd be a church spire that would overshadow it. Now, I don't know exactly how to track down every part of where that comes from, but it's sound practice that whenever someone says Joseph Smith said, you should be able to find where Joseph Smith said it, especially with the Joseph Smith Papers website. If there's something that's pretty specific that Joseph said, you should be able to go to the website, put it into the search. If no part of what he quote unquote said came up, that doesn't mean that there's not a record of it, but it means it's not something that he said in his life that was recorded in his life, right? Because it's not a contemporary document. Now, of course, you have thousands of documents where people are later saying, oh yeah, I was talking to Joseph once and he said this. So it still might be possible. But I think really part of the origination of this is there was a church news article in 1959 that was entitled Shadow of Mormon Chapel Falls on Grave of Governor Boggs. Don't worry, they used the word Mormon back then. It was okay. So even though it's the church news, I'm not reading this from the Salt Lake Tribune. Shadow of Mormon Chapel Falls on Grave of Governor Boggs, written by George I. Scott. And it's Napa, California. Time has given an ironical twist to a trying time in the history of the church. In the trouble-filled days of 1834 and 1839, when officials of Missouri threatened to exterminate the Mormons if they did not leave their lands and homes, the drastic measures were backed by Governor Lilburn W. Boggs and his subordinates. The old settlers of Missouri openly threatened that every man, woman, and child would be whipped and scourged if they did not leave the country. Mobbings followed. Troops were called into action against the church members by Governor Boggs. The Mormons finally left for Nauvoo. Following the martyrdom of their prophet, Joseph Smith, the pioneers prepared for their great migration west. At about the same time, another Westerner headed west. He was Lilburn W. Boggs. He went to California in 1848 and became a member of the first Constitutional Convention of the state. Today, his grave is marked by a tombstone in a graveyard at Napa, California. On a hill overlooking the graveyard and in view of the former governor's grave is the Santa Rosa Stake Tabernacle of the church that he ordered exterminated in Missouri. The tabernacle is headquarters for 4,231 Mormons in the Napa Valley and one of the 37 stakes in the state of California. So you can tell there's a little bit of a flex going on there from George Scott. Yeah, just a minor flex. You'll notice that even that doesn't say, and thus fulfills the prophecy of Joseph Smith. Da, 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 da.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a literary, he's playing with words a little bit to say in the shadow of, right?
In the shadow of the everlasting hills. Again, we leave you, Governor Boggs, in the shadow of a stake center in Napa.
Santa Rosa stake.
Yeah, well, so you can see how, and then the whole idea of, and grass won't grow under. There's actually an old common, curse that people would have, that would be put upon your grave, things like that. So I don't know how it got to the point where it is now. But like I said, there are anti-Mormon subreddits that talk about the very fact that Joseph Smith said that there'd be a shadow on his grave and there isn't one. And I mean, where did Joseph Smith say this is the question, right? So you get to this point where you realize, there's a lot of the times when you hear things like that, if you can't find that source readily available on either, the church's website or on the Joseph Smith Papers website, then there's a pretty good chance that it's not actually that great a source, even if it is a source. And in this case, it seems to be folklore. Now, in the question that he originally asked, the church just sold that building. Well, now, so now it's not, it's no longer in force, right? Or, maybe they baptized him for the dead, so now it doesn't matter that the shadow's not on his grave. It's an interesting thing for Latter-day Saints. We actually have a long history of wanting horrible things to happen to the people that were our persecutors. And
what was that? There's a popular book about what happens.
The fate of the persecutors of the
Yes.
prophet Joseph Smith. And a lot of people love that book, and they love it because it's like, and this person had this horrible thing happen to them. The problem is the people that I most want to see horrible things happen to them, which sounds not very Christ-like, but also,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, is not very Christ-like. Those are people that lived long lives. I mean, look, William Law is the one who put together the Nauvoo Expositor. He's a member of the first presidency who apostatizes and is directly responsible for the actions that lead to Joseph Smith dying. He dies an old man, right? So once people start making the argument of, and this person is going to suffer, oh, will they suffer? Why are we only having the minor people suffer? Not, it's not going to be William Law. It's not going to be John C. Bennett. It's not going to be, Philastus Hurlbut. He'll live to a nice old age. Won't be Eber Howe. It'll be just some minor person oh yeah, he was one of the people that helped find guns for the people who were at Carthage who shot him. What about the people who actually shot him at Carthage?
Oh, no. They lived long, happy lives.
Happy lives. They lived to the fullest extent. So happy all the time. There's also, and like I said, this is all clouded by the fact that even today, anti-Mormons want to accuse Joseph Smith of ordering the murder of Lilburn Boggs. Now, in point of fact, they're going to arrest Rockwell and keep him in jail for nearly a year, and then he isn't convicted. He's able to get away, right? And then that leads to that famous story of him showing up. He actually shows up in Nauvoo on Christmas during the Christmas party. He comes to the door and he's all ragged. It's almost like he'd been in a Missouri prison for a year. And at first the guards guarding the door assume he is a Missourian because of his dress and manners, and that he's a drunk Missourian trying to break in. But in fact, it's Porter Rockwell, right? Well, not only do we not have good evidence of Joseph Smith saying, "Oh yeah, I prophesy that he's going to die early and that there's going to be a shadow that casts over his grave and grass will never grow there," and on and on and on. We actually kind of have the opposite. We have it recorded in the manuscript history of the church, part of what Joseph gave in a talk, and he's speaking about what happened when he was at Dixon, Illinois. It was when these Missouri, I don't know what you call them, bounty hunters. They are claimed to be lawmen from Missouri, but they are there to take Joseph back down to be tried and likely executed for the attempted murder of Boggs. When the evidence that they have, legitimately, they find the pistol on the ground. They're like, "Oh yeah, that pistol's actually from this guy's shop." And then they say, "Oh yeah, you know who I think thought that pistol in that shop was good? Porter Rockwell." And that, it's like hearsay on top of the hearsay on top of it. But look, Could Porter Rockwell have attempted to murder him? Look, it's entirely possible. It's not very likely, and it's certainly more unlikely that Joseph Smith is ordering him to do it. At any rate, when he is captured by these guys and the people intervene, this is what Joseph says, reflecting back on it. The people of Dixon were ready to take me from my persecutors, and I could have killed them, notwithstanding their pistols. But I had no disposition to kill any man, though my worst enemy, not even Boggs. In fact, he would have more hell to live in reflection of his past crimes than to die. So not only do you not have Joseph saying, oh yeah, he's going to die an early, horrible, nasty death, and there's going to be a church built to put a shadow on his grave. The one place where we do have a good Joseph Smith source talking about Boggs and Boggs' life is that Joseph wants him to live so that for the rest of his life he can reflect on the fact that thousands of people were driven from his state and dozens of people were murdered because of him. I don't know how much reflecting Boggs was doing, honestly. It seems like not a lot. I will say, though, this is, talk about getting into the weeds.
Well, we're here.
You mean because
we're doing a second episode of something that's already in the weeds from what it was we were doing before. So I feel this is on point with where we need to be.
I feel like maybe we should call these two episodes Into the Weeds, Into the Thick of It.
Into the Thick of It.
Into the Thick of It?
With Lilburn Boggs.
Into the Thick of It. You know what? That's what we're going to call it.
All right.
And then we'll come back to apostles and apostates some
Sounds
other
good.
time.
I'll make a note.
Although we did talk about a lot of apostates. We just didn't talk about them enough. Anyway, Boggs, as the article said, he was a member of the Constitutional Convention. Well, he is part of another kind of tragic episode in Latter-day Saint history. The initial governor of California is another Missourian. Apparently everyone who lives in Missouri moved to California. And much like the Wisconsin Golden Investigator, all of them also apparently moved to California because there weren't any in Wisconsin. But he's another person actually who's part of some of Joseph Smith's trials in Missouri, and that's Peter Hardeman Burnett. He becomes the first governor of California. Well, there was a plan that was hatched by the Zachary Taylor administration because Zachary Taylor was president in the midst of this huge controversy over the results of the Mexican War. Now, we're going to spend so much time on this on the premium content, 2 or 3 years from now when we get to the Mexican War, right?
Yes, which kind of goes to Anthony's point of not quite finding enough value to pay for it.
I feel like Anthony needs to buy it for a month and then tell us if it's not worth it, which he seems to be more than willing to tell us that it's not worth it.
Well, he needs to buy it for a month, but accidentally click the payment for the year.
Right. Anthony, what we need from you is to accidentally purchase a year subscription to the premium content. What we'll learn anyway when we get to that is one of the major things that actually leads to the American Civil War. I mean, of course, slavery is the issue, but there was slavery in the United States for, since the colonial time, since, the early 1600s, you have slaves in the American colonies. So why are you going to war over it in 1861? Well, the spark that lights that fuse is actually the monumental victory of the Americans over the Mexicans in the Mexican War. I mean, nearly a third of the existing United States is added to the country by the Mexican cession, and our personal favorite, one of the things we like to drop, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That's how all that area becomes part of the United States. Well, the argument over slavery, it actually revolves around look, there's abolitionists in the North who certainly want slavery ended immediately. But the real arguments leading up to the Civil War are not about slavery in general. It's about whether or not these new territories that had just been captured from Mexico, whether or not they should be open to the settlement of slaves. And that's because they basically had already worked out all of the other land, all of the Louisiana Purchase area. That was all to be, after Missouri, after the Missouri Compromise, all of that Louisiana Purchase area, that was to be free forever. Well, there wasn't any other land for slavery to expand to because we'd already settled it by law. And then suddenly you have all of the areas of California, the state, today, as well as Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, part of half of Colorado, part of Wyoming, Nevada, all of that comes into the Union as territory. Now, they're not broken up into those states yet, but all of that would become those states. And you have this whole new argument. Are these territories open to settlement with people who have slaves? And Latter-day Saints are going to get caught up in this argument because we are living in one of those areas. We moved to Mexico, we left the country, and then the borders of the country caught us as soon as we ran away from them. And so it becomes a question again. So Zachary Taylor has this ingenious plan. Now, Zachary Taylor owns slaves. He is a slave owner. Lives in Louisiana. He is not a non-slaveholder. He has no problem with the expansion of slavery, but he's first and foremost a nationalist. He's, the great general, the hero of Buena Vista, the great general of the Mexican War. He doesn't think that it's worth splitting the nation apart to argue over whether or not there should be slavery in somewhere like Arizona. Like, he'd been there and he was like, we're not growing anything here. There's no water unless unless you're trying to harvest cacti, there's nothing that's going to grow. Now, in point of fact, he was totally wrong, as we now have a legion of Arizona listeners sending us emails right now. Before you hit send on the angrily typed email, Taylor completely misjudged it. He had no conception of how easily they could irrigate, and that, of course, Arizona becomes one of the great agricultural states in the Union. It probably wouldn't have done that back then because you needed much more modern irrigation and pumping techniques. But at any rate, the reason why it's an issue is you have this vast area that they're going to become territories of the United States. Why is that a problem? Because territories are under the purview of the Congress, right? The United States Congress gets to decide whether or not they are free or slave. And it's the argument of whether or not the Congress decides whether or not they're free or slave that is leading to all of this, animosity and anger. So Taylor's idea is, what if we bypassed the territorial stage altogether? What if we took all of what is today Nevada, Arizona, part of Arizona, and Utah, and part of Colorado, part of Wyoming? What if we took all of that and we made one gigantic California? We made one gigantic state out of it, and then we made another gigantic state out of what, the New Mexico, Arizona area. If they just came in as states, then the Congress couldn't argue about whether or not they should be free or slave territories, because everyone acknowledges that states have the right to choose whether they're free or slave. Now, the problem, of course, is in order to get people on board with this, you need people in the two major population centers of those territories to agree to it. So Taylor dispatches a secret emissary. Isn't this fun?
This is fun. And by secret, do you mean John C. Bennett's secret, or does he tells a bunch of people in the hair salon?
Yeah. So,
by the way, we do get great ideas for T-shirts. I think we're eventually going to be doing this, where we get T-shirt designs and ideas. We need a T-shirt of John C. Bennett with his head in one of those 1950 hair dryers.
Yeah, where he says, "I'll tell you what Porter Rockwell told me. I'll tell you that."
Yeah. But it is a secret.
Yeah. Oh, it's an actual secret.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because he's trying to affect this, making it look like the federal government isn't affecting it. So what he wants is the California Constitution, because California is already, the part of California that's a state today is already urging a state convention because it's right after the huge gold rush. So there's over 100,000 people in the area on the west coast of California. But technically, in that territory, there's another large population center, and that is Salt Lake, where all the Latter-day Saints have gone. So Taylor sends this secret emissary to go meet with the Mormons to see if they would be willing to go along with being part of this mega California, to make essentially almost all of the territory taken from Mexico in the war one giant state called California. And if we went along with it, then he could put it into practice. And, the emissary says, look, read the arguments that are going on in Congress right now. This could tear our nation apart. Meets with Brigham Young, and Brigham Young says, wow, you're asking a lot. We just got free of being a part of the United States. You're asking us to join ourselves to California. And Brigham Young said, okay, we'll do it. Again, the terribly traitorous Brigham Young, right? Saying, okay, we'll do it. And sends emissaries to California to go participate in their constitutional convention. Now, Taylor had sent another emissary to the other part of what is today California to try to tell them on the same thing. Hey, we need to make this one giant state, this whole area one giant state. Well, that emissary landed on the ground, realized how much impetus there was to create their own state government, and instead of waiting to find out what the other emissary to the Mormons said, immediately pushed forward with plans for a state convention, hoping that they would pick him as the senator. So he just totally, essentially threw Taylor's plans out the window for his own. Again, I know it's hard to believe that a politician would dishonorably do something in order to advance their own political career. But this is the 19th century, where a politician is willing to lie, where they're willing to completely go against other agreements and arrangements they've already made in order to advance their political career. It's hard to look at history sometimes. It's difficult. Well, that constitutional convention, several of the people that are in it, like Lilburn Boggs and Peter Burnett, who ends up being the president, what do you think they think about the idea of including all of the Mormons in their state? What do you think they think of that?
I think they were against it.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. They create their constitutional convention and then they elect all of it's a provisional election. You elect, this is who our governor will be if Congress approves our constitution. This is who our senators will be if Congress approves our constitution. This is who our congressmen will be, right? So they're essentially like shadow senators and shadow governors. They aren't actual governors yet, but they will be if Congress approves their state petition. Well, these people have already had their election because they didn't wait for the Utah emissary. So now the Mormons go meet with the governor who will be the governor, and they have to convince him, Peter Burnett, hey, I know you've already been elected and you're going to be a governor and it's what you already wanted to be. We need you to rescind that, recall the Constitutional Convention so that we can all become a giant state, because that's what Zachary Taylor wanted anyway. Surprisingly, the people who've already been elected don't want to give up the fact that they've been elected, especially given the fact that a bunch of the new voters will be people who know that they're from Missouri and aren't terribly happy about them. So they don't redo the convention. And in fact, California comes in with the state boundaries that it has now, all part of the Compromise of 1850, which again, you can learn more of maybe on this podcast someday.
We've been talking about the Stamp Act on the premium side for about 3 months. So
yeah, I think we're at the Townsend duties.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. We're rapidly approaching the Boston Tea Party. We're thinking about it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So yes, the Compromise of 1850 is a bit out.
Yeah, it's a bit outside. Anyway, we don't have record of what Boggs is saying about this in these meetings, but obviously he's not exactly a huge fan of bringing the entire Mormon community back into his state. And of course, so the whole thing falls apart. And then you do have the arguments over the territories that they didn't want to have. And I'm not saying it would have prevented the coming of the American Civil War, but I am saying it's a little known aspect of Latter-day Saint history that we were part of this attempted solution. When it comes to these kinds of folklore things, and we get these kinds of questions quite a bit, there are people who say things like, "Oh, my mission president told me that he was told by somebody that absolutely this is what happened." That Boggs, that Joseph prophesied that the church would overshadow his grave and grass would never grow on it and he'd die an early death, all that kind of stuff. It's always good to just take a pause. And again, I know those kinds of things, they're almost like proofs, right? So we like them. So we like to say, do we know that this is exactly the floorboard that Joseph Smith walked across, or has this been a replacement? I mean, that it kind of makes us feel like we're closer to the events. And then we're always looking for secular proofs of the prophetic mission of Joseph Smith. At the same time, it's important to remember that it's only through the Holy Spirit that you can know that Joseph Smith is a prophet. It's cool to learn tidbits and facts. It's cool to learn all about the succession if we ever decide to actually talk about it. But the reality is, the only way you can know the truth about religious things is through the Holy Spirit. And we can learn things that help, make our testimony stronger, that help us understand how things happened in the past. The entire point of this podcast is to help try to answer questions and help people strengthen their testimonies as they learn about things of the past. And not everything in the past is great, but at least you can understand what really happened in the past, as opposed to what someone on some YouTube channel talking about the fourth feather dropping is claiming happened in the past. So I really appreciate the question. I know it took a little while to get to it because we covered some different things like John C. Bennett, who I hate. And I think, do I have to say that every time I say his name?
I think moving forward, just saying his name, it's implied that you hate him.
It's kind of like, after the Second Punic War.
Yes, of course.
Are you following me?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
This is the second one?
Not to be confused with the First Punic War.
Yeah, that's where the confusion was, I thought.
I feel like Richard immediately jumped to the Second Punic War, or the first.
The first.
Because
I always jump to the first.
Yeah,
I always jump to the First Punic War.
Hamilcar Barca is one of your heroes, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I thought you were going to go to the Third Punic War. But I don't know. You upset me a little bit. I thought perhaps this was going somewhere toward the sacking of Carthage, the destruction of Carthage.
Well, it has something to do with Carthage.
Okay.
Because I was going to say, every time I say John C. Bennett, I'm going to say that I hate him.
Right.
Right. It reminded me in that moment of Cato the Elder.
Oh, of course.
You've read a lot of Cato the Elder.
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
So much of Cato
He
the
has
Elder.
so much entrepreneurial spirit about him. This Roman senator, Cato the Elder, after the Second Punic War, which is that's the one with Hannibal, and I don't mean Hannibal Lecter. No, Hannibal, the great Carthaginian general. In fact, the term Punic you're like, why do you call it the Punic War if it's Rome versus Carthage? It's because that is the Roman, derivation of the term Phoenician, and Carthage is a Phoenician colony. So the same Phoenicians that are there in, you're following me?
Yeah, no, this is actually, we've received several emails
about the Punic Wars.
The Third Punic War and the First Punic War, but I feel like the Second Punic War.
That was where we needed to help.
Yeah,
we needed to help the listener.
Yeah, that's
anyway,
right.
After the Second Punic War, Carthage loses nearly almost all of its overseas colonies, and it's really just reduced to this kind of rump state in North Africa. Carthage is in what is today Tunisia, right? And Cato the Elder, every single time he gave a speech, he would end every speech with, and furthermore, I believe Carthage should be destroyed. So he just kept pushing for the actual destruction of Carthage, rather than just Carthage in this kind of reduced, humiliated state. And eventually, as you well know, because you were confusing the Third Punic War, they will go and destroy. They will destroy Carthage. And guess who destroys Carthage?
Scipio.
Scipio Africanus. That's how he gets the name Africanus, because he destroys Carthage. And I've always had a tender spot in my heart for the town of Scipio in Utah.
It makes me smile every time I drive
Because
by.
I don't know that they named the town Scipio because Scipio destroyed Carthage.
I kind of feel like they knew.
It's folklore that I don't want to find out. I want to believe that they named the town that because Scipio was the destroyer of Carthage, and therefore Carthage must be destroyed. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us this week, and we will possibly get back on track with Apostles and Apostates next week, but we don't know. Did I just say next week?
Yep. Yeah. Yep. Well, at the end of July, here in the Standard of Truth podcast is called Neck Week.
Well, it's because there's so many potato salads. Your neck is going to get bigger. Thank you so much. We'll join you. Hope you can join us.
We hope that Gerrit recovers from his stroke and the burnt toast that he's smelling right now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.